Have you ever wondered what it's like to work in law enforcement? Here on Behind the Star, we share stories about the Orange County Sheriff's Office, Central Florida's largest law enforcement agency. From forensics to dispatch to the deputies on patrol, we'll talk to the brave men and women who protect our community. This is Behind the Star, the official podcast of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Welcome to Behind the Star, the official podcast of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. My name is Jon Busdeker, the host of Behind the Star. I'm also the storyteller here at the agency. And if you haven't, follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. All kinds of great things that we're doing here at the Sheriff's Office. And so this week, I'm very excited about this because I had to go through this process before I started here at the Sheriff's Office. I had to get some background checks and some voice stress analysis tests, and we'll explain what all of that is. But I'm here this week with Jeff Tramonte. He's the sworn staff recruiter here at the Sheriff's Office, and Jon Nichols, the supervisor of recruiting and background. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing?
So a few weeks back, we talked to Steve Harrelson. He's one of the field recruiters here at the Sheriff's Office, and he and his team, they go out and they find deputies and they go to events and try to get people to work here. But your job is a little bit different. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. But I also want to talk a little bit about sort of the process of becoming a sworn deputy here, because it's not as simple as just applying in an application and getting a quick interview and then you're on the road. It's a little bit more complex than that. So I'm going to start with you, Jeff. I mean, tell people kind of exactly what you do as the sworn staff recruiter.
Well, you mentioned Steve Harrelson, and one of the jobs that he and his crew is to try to find people out in the community that are interested in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. Once he's kind of screened them and spoken to some and told them what we're looking for, then we encourage them to apply online. So once they apply online, that's where I get involved. That's my first contact with these applicants.
Okay.
For my position, I'm looking for people who are either in the academy or have already completed the academy and may even already be in law enforcement.
Oh, okay. So it's not always just somebody brand new to the idea of being a law enforcement officer. They could have maybe done this in another jurisdiction somewhere else.
That's correct. Steve Harrelson's crew, typically, they are not going to go to law enforcement agencies to recruit, but they do go to places where there are people who have never been in law enforcement.
Okay. All right.
But as a side of that, we do still get people that are currently law enforcement officers or former from another agency. Yeah,
sometimes people, maybe they work in New York and they say it is a lot sunnier in Florida than it is in New York City. Maybe I'll go down to Florida and work. But also, people have life changes and, they work somewhere and they say, well, my wife got a job or my husband got a job here in Central Florida. I want to move too. And so they contact you eventually.
That's correct. So my job is to screen them.
Okay. So
I look at their application. And I have very limited information. So I don't have everything I need to know, but I have the minimum amount. And from that, I make a decision on whether or not this person looks like somebody that we want to go ahead and offer the processing packet to. Sometimes I have questions for these applicants, things I need to have clarified. Documents that I need to review because maybe they've told us something that we need to follow up with. So I go through that whole process, and then in the end, I either say, yes, we're going to send you a processing packet, or no, you're just not that person for us, and then we don't send it to them.
Yeah. So Jon, as supervisor of recruiting and background, what are we looking for when we're looking for deputies and sworn officers?
Yes, some of the things that our recruiters are screening for. We have recruiters for 911s. We have recruiters for the sponsorship recruits. We have recruiters for civilians. And so Jeff is just one of the cogs and all the wheels that go on in recruiting and background. But one of the main things we're looking for is a good work history. And we want to see some longevity and some, reasons why you had left that position in good terms. You be honest with us. If you were terminated, we want to know why you were terminated. We're also looking at your driving history and some other factors just to kind of keep the just part of the screening process, basically.
So I sort of alluded to this at the very beginning on how it's not as simple as just filling out an application and working here at the sheriff's office. There's a long process, longer for some, maybe shorter for others, depending. And it's not as simple as just filling out an application. Jeff, can you kind of explain when somebody does apply or they're interested in working here, what are some of the questions or some of the things you look for in their history before they start working here at the sheriff's office?
Well, in the very beginning, we do ask about past criminal acts that they've committed. We know that everybody is not perfect.
Yeah, that's an important point because I think people,
absolutely,
especially deputies, they think, oh my gosh, if I ever got a ticket, I'm out. I'm never going to be able to work at the sheriff's office. It's not necessarily that case. Now, granted, you probably can't do really bad things, but there's a certain level that, yeah, I mean, everybody's human.
Right. There's a certain tolerance level that we can accept from what people have done in the past. A lot of times it may not be just that they did it in the past, but how long ago in the past did that occur?
I mean, teenagers are stupid sometimes.
Exactly.
And you do stupid things as teenagers.
Right. I mean, if we look at somebody who just committed a crime that typically a teenager might commit 10 years before.
Like what? Like what's an example?
Like if they had burglarized a house, if they had trespassed, if they had used drugs, just stuff that you typically see that when you're at that age, we have seen a lot of people do it. We've seen people go on to be great law enforcement officers that did stupid stuff when they were young.
Yeah.
But if we saw those same types of things occurring in someone at a much closer period to when they're applying to us, well, then that starts to raise some questions, and we have to look at that even more closer to see what this is all about.
Yeah, it's one thing, John, to do it when you're 13. It's another when you're 33.
I was going to say, yeah, there's if you're doing these things when you're in your 30s or late 20s, that typical teenage stuff, then that's a red flag. That's just not something that we would want to have people apply for. So,
and I'm sure every case is different. I mean,
it's a
when
case
you say
by case,
drugs, you say
case
crimes.
by case basis.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. Everybody has a different past, different history, circumstances, family. Plays a big part of it. Location, where they grew up, plays a big part of it. So it has to be a case-by-case situation.
And obviously, I'm not a law enforcement officer, and I know I didn't go through the same process as the deputies did, but I did go through a similar process where, the application I had to fill out to start here, and once again, I don't touch firearms. I don't plan to. I'm not arresting anybody, but I still work here. I represent the sheriff's office. The packet I had to do was the same thing. I had to answer some pretty personal questions.
Yeah, we definitely get into the nitty and gritty. I think the community at large, they hold law enforcement to a high standard.
As they should.
As they should. Morals and ethics. And we have to screen everything in the applicant's life. And there's some things a lot of applicants will tell us that they don't even tell their spouse or family members. So, and we have to know about it because if it comes up down the road, and there's some patterns there that we want to try to avoid. But that's why we also ask in the recruiting phase and the background phase, we start asking for documentation, birth certificates, social security cards, and other types of financial wage and income types of transcripts and credit checks we do. You had asked earlier why we do credit checks.
Yeah. So as you said, there's all these different documents that you have to gather together. And it's funny, when I applied here, I'm not from Central Florida. I grew up in Michigan. I've lived here 10 years. But some of the documents that were requested when I started here was my birth certificate, my social security card, my transcripts from high school, my high school diploma. And I do have my social security card. Most people do. Most people even have their birth certificate. I haven't seen my high school diploma in 15, 20 years.
Yeah,
so I had to call my mom and hey mom, do I still have that? But luckily, I think we worked it out with my transcripts. But so I'm going to ask Jeff here real quick. Why ask for all that stuff? I mean, why do you need my high school transcripts? I mean, I did pretty well in high school. I'm proud of how I did, but why do you need that stuff?
Well, on the law enforcement side, for those that are applying or that we're hiring to be deputy sheriffs, there are certain requirements that the state of Florida has in order to become a law enforcement officer.
FDLE.
And a high school diploma is one of those, or a high school verification of high school graduation.
Yeah.
And with civilians, it's just a matter of the policy of the Orange County Sheriff's Office is that we hire people that have certain minimum requirements.
Yeah.
And those minimum requirements have been established for many, many years. And so we feel that those minimum requirements are the bare minimums that we want a person to have in order to work here.
And so this is your way to check it.
Correct. And so the bottom line is this. We know that people are not always honest about everything.
And we're going to get to that in a second.
Okay. So then I won't go into anything deeper at that point.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about some background checks and how you check out the background checks.
Right. And so that's why we ask for these things, is for verification, for vetting purposes, but also just to meet our minimum requirements.
So John, you had mentioned credit checks. And so, when I buy a car or if I want to buy a house, I typically have to get a credit check. It's not always the case when people get a job, especially when you work in the private sector. One of the reasons you get a job, you might need to pay off some debt.
Yeah.
But here it's a little bit different. Explain why our recruits and our people that work here need to get a credit check.
I was surprised when they asked for my credit check, and I said, "Why do you need a credit check?"
Were you nervous?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think there's a lot of people a little nervous. And it's actually funny because a lot of people don't realize they have some debt also. So we actually have helped people clear their debt.
And sometimes you don't even know your own credit score, and you might even be surprised, like, 635, that's not so good.
But the main reason is, it's all about temptation. Deputy with high credit debt, loans or whatever that he may have or she have, they may be tempted to not submit all the evidence that they found. If they found $500,000, how much of that evidence will they be submitting? So they could take a little bit temptation to pay off their debt, rather than being the good deputy and honest deputy and submitting all the evidence. So yeah, that is one of the things that we definitely do screen. Check is the credit checks, and we put people on payment plans to work that credit off. And there are ways that we work with the applicant to get them to the point where we can keep moving them forward in the hiring process.
Is that a case-by-case basis too? I mean,
absolutely.
Okay. There's not like a number. I mean, if you're, I mean, I don't know. Is there a number like, if you're below 700, forget about it, or okay? Because people, I mean, once again, you said this earlier, people can have circumstances that, maybe they paid for their mom's operation and now they have all this debt. And
we see a lot of student loan debt. We see a lot of medical debt. Those are things that just sometimes get out of control. But there are different types of debt. There's different type of people. Again, it's on a case by case.
Yeah, you're buying flashy cars and now you need to pay them off.
Yeah.
That might be a different debt than having to go to grad school.
The debt that we really zone in on is what we call revolving debt. That's buying furniture. That's buying movies. That's buying little luxury things that it's really not pertinent to your life.
Yeah.
So that's revolving debt. That you have a high revolving debt. You have a spending issue, and you need to get into a payment plan and get that cleared out.
Sort that out maybe before you apply or before you start here. Yeah. So Jeff, you had talked about this, about people maybe not being always so truthful on their applications. So as I said, when you go through the process of applying here and working here, you do have to answer some pretty personal questions. Have you been convicted of a crime? There's a lot more questions, even more detailed than that. And I remember filling that out, and it's 3, 4, 5 pages, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. Maybe I haven't told my spouse all these things that I've done in my entire life. But as somebody, you could lie on those, I guess, and it's hard to maybe check it out. So I want to talk about this. Part of the job process here is going through something called a Voicestress analysis test. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. The document that you're referring to that you had to fill out is what we call the CVSA questionnaire, or Computer Voice Stress Analysis. And so that questionnaire is designed to try to identify all the things that you've done in your life that we want to be able to take a look at.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that when you answer yes, that you're going to be disqualified.
Yeah. Can you maybe say some other questions? Do you know some questions off the top of your head?
Well, I mean, we have questions such as, is there anything you've done in your background that you could be blackmailed for?
Drug use.
We ask about drug use. We ask about your driving history. We want to know about criminal acts that you've done. There's one page that just has probably about 30 or 35 different criminal acts. Have you ever committed a battery on somebody, or have you ever committed arson or burglary? I mean, there's just a lot of questions. We cover most of the crimes out there. Identity theft and things like that, computer crimes, things along those lines.
And for military personnel, we'll ask them, did you get any trouble in the military, and anything like that. So it's the Voicestress does. It will send up red flags that they're not being totally honest with us.
Yeah. And for me, it really gets you thinking, like, oh my gosh, is there something I did at 15 that I just forgot about, or maybe wasn't a big deal then? And it probably wasn't a big deal then, but it really gets you thinking about some things you've done in your life.
Well, a common one that a lot of people forget about is there any crimes that you could have been arrested for? And a lot of people are like, no. And then well, what about underage drinking? Like, oh, yes. Speeding. Oh, yes, that's true.
Yeah, and same thing. I'm sure when I was filling that out, I don't even remember exactly what I put. But yeah, you're like, oh yeah, well maybe if there would have been a police officer around, maybe not that it was terrible, but I maybe could have got arrested. So what's the point of that, or what's sort of the end result of all that?
Well, let me just say before I answer that, let me say that really what I want the listeners to understand is that we're looking for people that are honest about things they've done in their past. There's nothing you can do about that past. It is what it is. So it's better to, take it on head first, go in there, and let's look at everything and decide. Just because you've done something and you answer the question yes, and you tell us what happened, doesn't mean you're going to get taken out of the process.
Yeah.
So once that document is submitted to us, then we will invite the applicants to come in for the actual Voicestress examination.
Yeah. Before you say that, I want to make that point again. Just because you've done something in your life doesn't mean you're completely disqualified from working here.
Absolutely.
And I hope people who are listening understand that, because you might have some really good people who would be great deputies, great law enforcement officers who might look at that questionnaire and say, oh my gosh, if they know I smoked pot when I was in high school, they're going to get rid of me. And that's not always the case.
Right.
And so I want people to understand that.
Yes, honesty is definitely the key here. Integrity, honesty. Just let us know what happened in your past. Again, it's a case-by-case situation. We rather have you be honest rather than lying on the CVSA. And then during background, we find something and like, oh, I didn't want to say that. It's like, well, you're disqualified because you weren't honest with us.
Okay, Jeff. So now explain the Voicestress analysis test. Tell people what that is.
Sure. This is a program or a computer that has software that is able to determine when a person has stress in their vocal cords.
Yes.
Okay. So as you're answering the questions, the examiner in most cases can never hear stress. Unless the person's voice just really changes a lot, you're not going to know if there's stress or not. But your vocal cords are like guitar strings, for the easiest way to explain.
Okay.
And a guitar string will make a sound. If it's very loose, it'll make one sound. And if you tighten that guitar string, it will make a different sound. Well, this is very similar. If your voice is not under stress, it will present a certain type of pattern on the computer screen. If your voice is under stress, it will show a completely different type of pattern.
Ah, all right. And so we should explain, this is an interview. You get called in. It's usually an interview, you and the person who's doing the test.
Correct.
You get hooked up to a microphone.
That's it.
Yeah.
Just a microphone.
And then you talk for 2, 3, 4 hours, and you go through that packet of information that you already filled out.
CVSA questionnaire.
The questionnaire that you've already sort of answered all these questions, and you sort of go down one by one.
Every one of them.
And then you answer them again on this computer, and then the person doing the test sort of watches the answers.
Sort of like that.
Okay.
No,
this is why you're here to explain it, because this
Correct.
is how it felt to me.
Okay, so the testing itself is not occurring during the period in which you're reviewing the questionnaire.
Okay.
You're just reviewing the questionnaire because a lot of times when an applicant fills that questionnaire out, they may have filled it out weeks before they actually take the exam.
Okay.
Once they submit it, there's no way for them to change their answer. So a lot of times people think about things that they forgot about. So they come in, sit down with the examiner, and sometimes they'll say, hey, let me tell you up front, I thought of something that I had said no to, but I want to clarify it. I did think of something. So this is their opportunity to have a chance to update that questionnaire.
And that's okay.
And that's fine.
Absolutely.
We're fine with that. We're we want to know, we want to test you on your truthfulness. And if that means you are able to recall something, because if you did recall it, but you don't tell us, it's going to show up as stress. So they give them that whole opportunity. So that's the reason why you go over that entire packet again. Gives them that chance. So after it's all over, then the actual test begins. And there are a handful of questions in which they're going to ask. There's some of the most important questions that we want to know the answer to, but then there's a couple of kind of catch-all questions that sort of allows us to identify if you're holding something back, because like you said, there's a lot of questions.
But
on the actual exam, there's far fewer, so we can't ask them all. So this is designed to try to capture any other stress that there might be on some of the other questions that we're not asking you specifically about. And then you go through that a couple of times and you take a look at everything, and the examiner has to determine whether or not he maybe sees some stress. There are people that do show stress after they've gone through the exam.
It's pretty stressful.
Right.
You're talking about your past. And
Yeah.
You're talking about the skeletons in the closet.
And now
Right.
And you're asking this person to tell you intimate things about them that maybe no one knows about. And so it is difficult. And you got to really spend some time in the beginning before the exam to try to help let them at least understand that you're not here to embarrass them or to judge them. You're just here to get information so that we can test them.
Yeah.
And so in the end, if there is some stress on there, they're going to talk about it. We're going to try to go through it. And then hopefully everything clears up and we're good to go.
So John, what's the point of, you're the supervisor. What's the point of all this? Why not just believe everybody what they say?
Again, not everybody's very honest, and again, the community puts the deputies into a high regard. So, people don't want to talk about their past. So this is a way to get them to come out to us and tell us what is going on, so that we don't find out about it in background. We have really great background investigators working for us to delve into those places that people don't want to talk about. So, yes, it's a long exam. It does take a while, but it does serve a purpose by getting the information from the applicant to that, and then from there, the examiner will come up with a report, and then it'll go to our managers, supervisors for review. And we'll look at all the warts. We'll look at all the good things, a lot of positive stuff that comes out of it as well. And we'll, from that, ascertain whether to move the applicant forward to background or not.
So John, is it common for people to fail that, and you say, look, it just didn't work out, and maybe come back in a few years, or do most people sort of pass that?
I don't know the exact stat, but people do fail the CVSA exam. They just too stressed out, or the things that they did divulge is something that the sheriff's office does not want to get involved with.
Okay.
So there's that aspect of it as well. So they don't really fail it. It's just a matter of what they bring to the table per se.
Okay.
So
all right,
they make a determination from there. So
Jeff, let's say I pass my test, or I do well enough on my test to where everything's good, everything's fine. I look like a great applicant, but that's not the end. We're still not there yet. There's still the background portion of it. Can you talk about that? What does that mean? What's the background portion of the recruit or the process?
Sure. So now we've began to develop quite a bit of a background already on this person. Mm-hmm. They've answered a lot of questions. They have filled out a pre-screener application. We send them some more documents that they return to us, so now we start to know where they've been residing. And so once it gets into background, now it becomes a time of verifying the information they have told us, but also to look for things that they did not tell us.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of, you're doing both. And so we have a lot of databases that we have access to, databases that the average person can't get in touch with. They tell us, well, I got my driving record, but we have databases that go deeper than a driving record does.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I
Yes.
mean, I sent in everything for me. So for me, I've lived in, let's see, 1, 2, 3. This is the 4th state I've lived in since I left home for Michigan. I did get a traffic ticket in Virginia. I got one in Alabama. I've actually got one in Ontario, Canada, which I divulged when I did all this.
Right.
But I had to prove all that, and so I actually had to go to I didn't have to drive there, but I had to contact the state of Alabama because it happened within the last 10 years or something like that, and they had to send the document to the sheriff's office here so you could verify it.
Right. So I mean, we're constantly sending requests for information all over the United States and abroad, wherever we need it to, wherever you're from. And we contact employers, we contact your neighbors, we contact personal references.
Education institutes, military locations, and so on.
A little bit of everything. You really try to find everything about this person.
Right. I mean, they have told us these things. And so a lot of times it's just a matter of verifying it. And then there's those ones that feel like, well, maybe if I don't tell them, they won't know about it or they won't find out.
That's not a good strategy.
No.
It's not a good strategy because what they don't realize is not only are they hurting their chances for getting hired by our agency, they're hurting their chances to get hired by any law enforcement agency, because integrity and truthfulness are two of the biggest pillars of being a law enforcement officer. And if you don't have those, then you're not the person we're looking for. This is a high liability job. We put a gun and a badge on this person. They have the ability to take people's rights away. And so we want to make sure we are dealing with people that have been honest. Again, it goes back to what we said in the beginning. You might tell us all this stuff and it may look and sound bad, but in the end, we have hired people with those types of backgrounds.
Yes.
That is our community. Our community is that. They're not the perfect person. And so, we have to verify this information. We have to make sure that we're hiring people that have been truthful with us. And because quite honestly, if we get people that are going to lie to us now, what are they going to do later?
That's a good point. I think that's a very important point. And you mentioned earlier, people do things in their past, and we've stressed this a lot. And I thought about that when I was doing my voice stress analysis test. The person across the table, they've probably heard every single thing, and the things that I've done are probably nowhere near what some other people have done. So I had to think about that. And you've heard it all, and so it's not like I'm going to shock anybody. So that's another thing. But John, I wanted to ask you, and you touched on this a little bit, Jeff, the checking with neighbors thing. That was an interesting thing for me. Luckily, I know some of my neighbors, but I think, and I wonder if times have just changed where a lot of people say, well, I don't even know who my neighbor is sometimes. And I'm sure you run into that.
Well, a lot of people don't know their neighbors. And so we tell, especially the sponsorship recruits or even our deputies, well, you're going to be knocking on doors in the future. And so go meet your neighbor and let them know that Orange County Sheriff's Office is going to be contacting them in some manner.
Why do you do that? Why do you care what my neighbor thinks of me?
Well, it's because it's an informal location, and you're just being yourself. Are you having lots of parties? Is there a lot of cars stopping in every 15 minutes and leaving? That's drug-related traffic. Loud music. Are you a good neighbor? You keep your yard. Are you good to your kids? And so on. So we do get a lot of good information from the neighbors. 99% is always positive. So. The people that we're dealing with. So very, very rare do we get a negative, but it does happen. And that's transfers over to our personal references as well. We'll get
Yeah, if you're putting personal reference on there, they're going to give you bad things to say. Probably not good for personal references, but I'm sure you've got
of
that.
the hundreds and hundreds that I've seen, I've seen maybe one. It's like you should have probably contacted that person. So it does happen, but very, very rare. So, but we look at the type of references, personal references. You may know a deputy, you may know a pastor, you may know a congressman. So it just helps you in the hiring process by that type of resume references.
So let's say I pass the voice, or I do well on that. It's fine. Everything checks out. Background, all good. Am I hired, or is there anything else?
No, there's a few more steps to go. And again, and that's part of the hiring process.
Yeah.
You guys can hear that it's lengthy. It does uncover a lot of things. The next step then is you come into the sheriff's office looking good, and you're going to be videotaped for the sheriff.
Okay, so I didn't have to do this. As
a civilian,
I didn't have to do this. So yeah, explain this. You got to get videotaped.
Yes, the sheriff and the number of applicants that we have, he just cannot afford the time to sit down with every applicant and ask them questions. So we do have a pre-format questions that we do ask them, all sworn, to be videotaped, and then we take them to the sheriff. We read their background report that's generated from the background investigator, and then we show the video of the applicant. Sheriff looks at every video.
How long are they? Like 10, 15 minutes or longer?
I would say average is probably about 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. What type? Can you say what types of questions?
I don't want to get into
the
type of questions, but but they're just integrity based questions.
All right.
It's just trying to get the applicant to respond to them to kind of show their behavior and the type of person that the sheriff can see a quick snapshot of.
Yeah,
so.
And so he watches them, and then
he watches them with the senior staff, and they make a decision whether or not to give the applicant a conditional offer.
All right. And so at that point, if sheriff says yes and senior staff says yes, then it's a thumbs up.
Well, it's only a conditional.
Okay, conditional offer.
So the conditional offer is pending on a medical background, which medical exam, as well as a drug screen, and then a psychological examination.
Oh, I didn't have to do. I had to do the medical, but I didn't have to do the psychological.
Yeah, not all civilians have to do a psychological. There's only a few civilian departments have to. 911's communications have to do a psychological, but for our purposes, yes, the deputies have to undergo a medical, drug screen, and a psychological evaluation. So,
all right. So once I pass all that,
then
am I hired?
Then you're at the finish line.
All right.
Yes.
So Jeff, how long, start to finish, how long does this usually take?
Well, the general average time is roughly 3 to 5 months.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is based on some people grew up right here in Central Florida. They've never left. They maybe are fairly young and don't have a lot of jobs. They get us everything we need and it's quick. Then we're looking on the shorter side. But some of them come from out of state. Some of them are
foreign born,
Some are foreign born. Some are older. They're not always in their 20s. And so they have a more extensive background that needs to be looked into. And so for them, they can take longer. And if they're struggling to maybe get their documents that we're asking for, so it's generally about a 3 to 5 month, and that's either for the sworn or the civilian position.
And that's a good point too. Like, I mean, a lot of times when you get a job, it's not that long. I mean, a lot of times you go in for an interview, somebody likes you, you're hired, and can you start next week? And I think people who have always worked in the private sector think, well, 3 to 5 months. I mean, they don't want me. I'm moving on, but that's typical. And so people should know it's not that we don't want you here. It just takes time.
Takes time. Yeah.
We have a lot of applicants.
That too. Yeah.
We have over 1,000 people that are always applying to us, and we have to every one of our staff recruiters have to put eyes on every single one of those applications. So it takes time, and then once you do get down to that few that you're going to keep moving forward, you've already spent time just kind of like sitting in a queue waiting for things to happen. So we run a lot of CVSA exams. in the end of a year. I think when I was running the unit, we were looking at 700 or so
Wow.
exams.
And as I said, that's not a 10-minute exam. It
No,
takes 2,
it's
3, 4
right.
hours
It's-
sometimes.
It's typically a 2 to 4 hour, again, depending on circumstances. But when you're doing 700 to 800 exams in a year, that's a lot of time that people are going to just kind of be sitting and idle for periods of time. So we try to explain to them along the way, because they do ask us what's going on and things like that. So
John, what's the percentage of people that apply here that actually get hired here?
You're looking at a 0.00%, something. It's. I'll give you a stat. We last year, 2018, we had about 8,400 applications.
Okay.
And that's civilian and sworn. And by the end of the year, we only hired about 220, 240 sworn and deputies. We actually hired 140 deputies. So
that's low.
So if you did the percent, it'd be 0.0002%.
It's low because we have high standards.
We have very high standards at the sheriff's office, and that was something that when I was hired here, I had no idea the levels that our sworn officers have to go through. Well, everybody has to go through, and it made me feel good as a citizen to know that they have a hiring process here set in stone that really gets the best of the best, and that that the deputies on the street are top notch.
Is there anything that has surprised either of you doing this job over the years?
The only thing that surprised me is human nature. It's an endless pool of how people can conduct themselves.
Okay,
I'll say politely.
That's the nicest way to say something like that.
It's always amazing.
How about you, Jeff? Anything that has
I'll
surprised
defer
you?
to John's description.
All right.
I've been in law enforcement over 40 years, and I would say that is probably the thing that I'm surprised the most. Well, I shouldn't say surprised anymore, but amazes me.
Yeah.
But we've seen and heard some very interesting things.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Mm-hmm. So, Jeff and John, thank you so much for joining me here on Behind the Star. I'm happy that I got a job here. I'm past the test and I'm working here, so I'm very thankful. But thank you too for being here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Behind the Star. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Also, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Jon Busdeker, and this is Behind the Star.